we can see them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to allow us to present our SOP today. We will go through each of these slides, and then please, at any point, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask me to stop, and then we can have that conversation, and then I will continue on, right? Okay, so this presentation is about the new standard operating procedure for submitter communications that we have created after analyzing the current state, and it's a broader effort to modernize the data operations. So in a nutshell, we will go through the why are we doing this, then we'll talk about the current state, we'll talk about a little bit about the definitions, and then we will dive into the future state and the next steps. That's in a nutshell of how we will follow through and proceed in this presentation, right? Okay, so the why, as part of the broader data governance modernization initiative currently underway at GMCB, we aim to establish a standardized approach to maintaining WeCure submitters to ensure compliance and enhance data quality. The authority granted by 18 VSA 9410 serves as the foundation for this SOP. In conjunction with the data team's recent efforts in entity resolution, we believe this SOP will provide clearer guidance and expectations for WeCure submitters, compliance obligations, and quality of data received. The data team has developed this SOP to formally detail GMCB's process for communicating with health insurers who fail to comply with registration, data submission, or annual attestation requirements, including the possibility of administrative penalties. This SOP was created in accordance with the Vermont Administrative Procedures Act and is being submitted to the GMCB for approval through a formal vote after the public comment period of 30 days. So moving on to the purpose of today's presentation is to provide a public forum for reviewing these process changes, which will impact current and future submitters to WeCures. Today starts the 30-day public comment period, after which point any necessary changes can be made before the board votes on adding this new standard operating procedure to the data team's governance work. So in its current state, we'll now look at the current state and how the process is being conducted. Right? So for submitter communications, currently OnPoint is the vendor, GMCB vendor, and OnPoint sends initial communication and reminders before the due dates and follow-up after the due dates. OnPoint escalates to the GMCB regarding health insurers who are non-responsive or with whom a resolution cannot be achieved after multiple exchanges. Even with the GMCB follow-up, health insurers often do not comply with their requirements. The current process adds significant administrative burden for both OnPoint and the GMCB, and I want to highlight that the current process is mostly manual. The new SOP is intended to assist with tracking communications and submitter responsiveness and remind insurers of their requirements and potential penalties for failing to fulfill those requirements. So a snapshot of the submission statistics is shown here. So for annual registrations for 2026, 327 health insurers were registered. Of these, 288 registrants registered by the due date, which is December 31 of the year, right? 33 health insurers from 2025 did not register for 2026. When it comes to attestation, 12 out of 34 submitters, which accounts to about 35%, did not complete attestation by the deadline. With respect to data submission for 2025, 24 files have still not been submitted. Incidentally, all these 24 files were not submitted by one submitter. Collectively, 35 submitters provided approximately 1080 submission months worth of data. Right, moving on to the data management, Currently, capturing data, like I mentioned before, it is mostly manual. Capturing data on individual submitters requires manual review of historical emails, meeting notes, etc. There is no process for sharing data on submitter compliance or data quality between GMCB, OnPoint, and other state data on health insurers. So obviously, it adds a significant burden, when we track all this information. So after reviewing the current state, we found opportunities for improvement and then created this SOP. With this SOP, data team and its partners have the opportunity to reduce manual effort for capturing submitter communications, improve institutional knowledge and data management around health insurers doing business in Vermont for our annual registration process, improve data quality by getting submitters attestation closer to 90% completion. Currently, it is sitting at about 65%. Reduce or remove data gaps from submitters in vCures. So now we will move on to the SOP definitions. There are 3 data processes, like I highlighted before. Annual registration is one, data submission is the second one, and the attestation reports is the third one. The vCures annual registration is a process by which the state verifies who is required to submit data. Health insurers providing services to Vermont residents are required to register annually, and the due date is December 31st. Those required to submit data, we call them submitters to vCures, are responsible for regular submission following the data reporting manual. It applies to health insurers serving 200 or more Vermont residents, and depending on how many covered lives, the submitters are required to complete annual, quarterly, or monthly submissions. Some submit monthly, some submit quarterly, and then some submit annually. In addition to each data submission, submitters are required to complete attestation reports, which is a key step to the data quality program for vCures. So now moving on to the entity types. So for annual registration, all health insurers doing business in Vermont are required to register. And the term health insurer is defined in 18 VSA 9410, and we would like to highlight that it includes third-party administrators and pharmacy benefit managers. With respect to data submission and attestation reporting, mandatory submitters are health insurers providing coverage for an average of 200 or more Vermont residents in each month in the last calendar year. This draft SOP does not currently apply to voluntary submitters. Voluntary submitters are those who are not required to submit, but choose to submit data. Right. So before we move on to the administrative penalties, I'll pause here to see if any comments or questions before we move on. Perfect. Okay. So moving on to the administrative penalties, under 18 VSA 9410, any person who knowingly fails to comply with the requirements of this section or rules adopted pursuant to this section shall be subject to an administrative penalty of not more than $1,000 per violation. The board may impose an administrative penalty of not more than $10,000 each for those violations the board finds were willful. This requires written notice and an opportunity for a hearing, and the information is published in Rule 8.0. So now a review of the future state with the new SOP. So the scope of the SOP is the non-compliance for annual registration, data submission, and attestation. And then I want to highlight that this excludes other vCures completion or improvement activities. So essentially, it limits to the non-compliance of annual registration, non-compliance of data submission, and non-compliance of attestation. The following health insurers are within the scope of this SOP. One, health insurers doing business in Vermont, they're required to do complete annual registration. And then mandatory submitters, like we discussed before, those who submit data either monthly, quarterly, or annually. And then it excludes voluntary submitters. And then with respect to the violations, the scope, of this SOP is known violations, and it excludes willful violations. So annual registration non-compliance, beginning with this one, the due date, like I mentioned before, is December 31 of each year. So 5 reminders about registration will be sent to health insurance companies by OnPoint Health Data between November 1 and December 31 ahead of the headline. So they would have received 5 communications already about the deadline for registration. Overdue notices are sent by OnPoint to unregistered health insurers around January 15, advising to complete registration by February 1. GMCB will then contact the non-registrants after allowing them 2 weeks to complete registration or be fined. GMCB will assess a $200 administrative penalty for each non-registrant organization in March. So after they have received all this communication, and if they still do not register in March, GMCB will assess a $200 administrative penalty. Health insurers may request a hearing to contest the penalty by submitting a written request within 7 days. GMCB will continue to contact the non-compliant organizations until they register with OnPoint or reach a maximum penalty of $1,000 per violation. And again, the scope of this SOP does not include willful violations. Moving on to the data submission non-compliance, data submissions are outlined in Rule 8.0, specifically 8.202 and 8.203. Submission schedules are either monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on the submitter and file type. The VCURE's reporting manual, issued by the Data Governance Council, describes the data that must be submitted, along with technical specifications and schedule. Submitters that have not provided data files or whose files do not meet the established specifications on time, manner, or format will be flagged by OnPoint, which will handle the initial communications to work with the submitter to bring them into compliance. Submitters will have 90 days to submit the correct data in the correct format to OnPoint. Submitters who still fail to remediate appropriately will be assessed $500 by the GMCB. Submitters may request a hearing to contest the penalty by submitting a written request within 7 days. No submitter can be fined more than $1,000 per violation for a knowing violation. The scope of this SOP does not include willful violations. It also does not include voluntary submitters. So moving on to the attestation non-compliance, submitters are required to validate that data received by OnPoint is the data submitted by the submitter and that the data complies with the GMCB's data reporting manual requirements. So submitters submit the data, OnPoint requests the submitters to attest that their submissions are accurate and in compliance, and then the submitters are required to attest. Submitters who have not provided their attestation within 1 month of receiving a request from OnPoint will receive a notification to comply within the following 2 weeks. The GMCB will then communicate to the non-compliant submitters and assesses $200 for non-compliance. Once again, a submitter may request a hearing to contest the penalty by submitting a written request within 7 days. The GMCB may increase the assessment incrementally up to $1,000 for knowing violation. No submitter can be fined more than $1,000 per violation for a knowing violation. And once again, the scope of this SOP does not include willful violations. It does not include voluntary submitters. So with respect to tracking, at the very beginning, I mentioned that the overall process is fully manual, highly manual, and as a result, it places significant administrative burden on all partners, like on the vendor partner, on GMCB, and other state partners as well, right? So in an effort to modernize this, the data team has begun working on a master data management solution to better capture data on health insurance companies doing business in Vermont and those submitting to VCures, along with communications and compliance. This MDM solution will be part of the improved data governance structure under data team and will enable entity resolution, which is a core part of functional data model. We are currently exploring solutions with OnPoint Health Data and other state partners, like on the implementation of this MDM. So in a nutshell, the steps to completion of this overall process, are one. Today, the GMCB staff has presented the full SOP and templates to the board in a public meeting. And then this initiates the public comment period of 30 days. And at the completion of this 30 days, the SOP will be submitted for a vote after the completion, and then any necessary changes that need to be made or have been made by that time, right? And we anticipate that we circle back by around the end of June. And then once, based on the vote, we will follow up with a conversation at the DGC, the Data Governance Council, which is currently anticipated to happen sometime in August. So that was the last slide, folks. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll pause here to see if any questions or any comments.
Thank you. I have one. Is Julia on too?
Yes.
So
yes, I'm on.
Why is it excluding willful violations? Willful violations are generally considered knowing, intentional, deliberate violations of rule or law. Why are we excluding intentional, deliberate violations?
So
And if we're excluding those, go ahead.
No, yeah, great question, Chair Foster. So the intent is that this SOP is setting up, the step-by-step process we're going to take when we have something that we believe might rise to the level of a willful violation. We can still pursue that. We can still move forward, but we just won't have if you look at the SOP, we have some letters that are pre-written. We have language that we've already just thought up. And we just don't have that pre-written step of it for the willful violations. So we can still go and pursue a willful violation if needed. Just the SOP as it's currently written didn't have that written out as part of it.
Okay, Lindsay.
Thank you. For the record, Lindsay Kill, Deputy Director of Data Programs. I just wanted to add that putting this process in place with the improved documentation, the automated messaging, and this clear incremental process will actually help us better identify the difference between a knowing and a willful violation. Right now, we really don't have any way to clearly see the pattern across submitters. So we're hoping that this will help with that.
All right. I mean, knowing and willful are usually used in conjunction. You can't really have a willful violation that's not knowing. So that's, I think, where I'm getting a little tripped up. Usually in the law, it's knowing and willful is together. Then there's reckless. So I guess that is just kind of what I'm stuck on a little bit. Maybe I'll talk to Julia after. But I don't see a situation where you can have a willful violation without a knowing violation. Willful means deliberate and intentional, which, would subsume knowing. We can talk about that later. Sarah?
My question is about what is a violation specifically that the penalty can be assessed for. I'm guessing it's not each line of data that you haven't submitted. but it could be. So can you just define a little bit what part?
Yeah, I can take that question.
Okay.
So because there are three categories of the communication types that we are requiring from submitters. So for annual registration, the violation is per year per submission, per registration. So if a company, a healthcare company is doing business in Vermont, and we have record that they're doing business in Vermont, and they did not register with VCures, and they failed to respond to the 6 total communications from OnPoint and GMCB, that is a violation for the annual registration. For the data submission, for mandatory submitters, let's use the example of a quarterly submitter. And their submission file is their a medical health insurance company. So their submission file is eligibility and a medical table quarterly. So the violation is the failure to submit that quarterly data either at all. So we have submitters who don't submit at all. And then we have submitters who send data files in the wrong format. So if the data reporting manual changes, they fail to make the changes. So either of those is a violation, and the penalty would be assessed on that quarter submission. But as time goes on, if they continue to fail to provide that quarter submission, and then let's say the next quarter comes around due and they haven't submitted that quarter either, that's now 2 violations. And then it's the same, similar to the attestation. You have to, submitters need to attest to the data quality of that submission. So if they fail to submit the attestation for that quarter, in the case of a quarterly submitter, for that quarterly submission, that's 1 violation. If time goes on and they have not responded to that initial request, and now another quarter has come due and they haven't attested to that quarter of data, that's a 2nd violation.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Jess?
Thanks. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a quick question about the penalty. So typically for a penalty to be effective, the penalty has to be large enough that non-compliance is more costly than compliance, right? So that non-compliance, whether measured financially, politically, operationally, is more costly than compliance. So I guess I'm wondering if these are statutory limits on what the penalty could be, or how did we determine that the administrative penalties here are significant enough to be able to meaningfully increase compliance?
I can talk a little bit. I don't know if I can speak too much on whether the penalty is enough for compliance, but I can say that the limits that you were mentioning are part of the statute that we're working with. So we have that limit of not more than $1,000 for a knowing violation, and then $10,000 for a willful violation. Those are in statute.
But how we determine what a violation is, sort of in regards to Sarah's question, we determine what a violation is, right? So that gives us a little bit of latitude with that penalty. Yes or no? I guess, does that give us some latitude? I'm concerned a little bit that $1,000 for a very large insurance company is not going to generate the types of compliance that we might want. So just thinking about that here.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So taking the example of a health insurance company that is new in taking, for example, a health insurance company that has failed to register by December 31st. their first submission for the calendar year is of January data. So if they fail to submit their registration, they fail to register and they are a mandatory submitter, they're going to have a penalty for the failure to have registered. They're going to have a penalty, they're going to have a violation of not having submitted their required data, which if they're a monthly submitter is going to be eligibility, medical, potentially also dental and pharmacy files. And then for every month that goes on, it would be a new violation. So I think because the language in the statute sets this max, and because based on our experience, the trend is that these violations do stack, like very quickly. A company can have many violations at once that they need to respond to. So we wanted to strike a balance between, like Sarah, a very astute observation, is a violation every row of data? No, that would be almost impossible for us to track. And for them to track as well. We tried to strike a balance between what is traceable, what is like a meaningful level of data that impacts the APCD. And again, knowing that these violations do accumulate very quickly. Stop there.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay.
Okay, any comment from the healthcare advocate?
Sorry, Chair Foster. Just one comment. I mean, I continue to be disappointed that the board has disabled video for these public meetings. I don't think it's in line with the board's goal of public participation. And I know there have been statements that it's to address problems. In my nearly a decade of attending meetings and 6 years since COVID, the problem we're solving is the one person's back of their monitor that we see. So it seems to me like we're solving problems that don't actually exist, and in solving the problems we're undermining core values. And it's also troubling that this just happened without any public notice, any public discussion, any attempt to find a better alternative that might meet the board's needs, but also serve the public goal of open meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment? Okay. Lindsay, Julia, and Robbie, thank you very much for taking this on and for presenting it to the board. I have a couple board meeting minutes to raise, so I'll move to old business. I'll do the board minutes there. I move to approve the board minutes of May 6, 2026.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Minutes are approved. May 13th, I move to approve those minutes.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those minutes are approved. And last, May 20th, I move for the approval of May 20th meeting minutes.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
One
Aye.
abstention, Chair Foster.
Noted. They're approved anyway. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I will move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.